This video is going to be a little different from my usual ones. I was originally going to make it part of my Farming Simulator Let's Play, but when I considered the topic I realized that if I did that, I would be far too distracted by what I had to do in the game to be able to concentrate on what I wanted to say. So I decided, why not show off Anteworld? It's the best walking simulator around. That's because I think it's just a demo engine, really. But the awesome thing about it is that it generates a world as big as the Earth itself, because it uses Google Maps to recreate a location. For instance, everyone in my family will recognize this view. Yeah, that's my mountain. But they still charge me if I want to go up the Pikes Peak Highway. On to the point of this video. A few days ago, I watched a YouTube video about Masada. You might not know what that is, but it's important in Jewish history. About 40 years after the death and resurrection of Christ, the Jews rebelled against the Roman Empire, and Masada is the fort the last of the rebels occupied before being destroyed by the Roman army in 73 AD. The video was interesting in and of itself because I like history, but it was also interesting because it sparked a correlation between those events and something that I had remembered from the Bible. See, one of the things the narrator in the video said, in sort of an offhanded manner of just relaying the facts, was that the army that had set up siege around Masada was the 10th Legion Fretensis. When I heard that, I thought to myself, what does Fretensis mean? I won't keep you in suspense. It means of the strait, as in a section of the sea. In fact, one place I looked said it literally is of the sea strait. The 10th Fretensis even had, as one of its emblems, a trireme, which is a warship that has 3 rows of rowers, hence the three in trireme. That had an immediate impact on me because it confirmed my correlation in ways I hadn't even considered before reading that translation. But before I tell you what that correlation was, we'll need to have a bit more information about the First Jewish War. The war began when the Jews revolted against Rome, but why did they do so? One source I read said that the Romans tried to put up a Roman eagle in the temple, but the Jewish historian Josephus, who was alive during these events, claimed that it was because some Greeks tried to sacrifice to pagan gods outside of the temple. Either way, the Jews were upset about this, and they refused to pay taxes, so the Roman governor Gessius Florus plundered the temple to get the money and arrested several Jewish leaders. This naturally caused an even bigger rebellion that saw the Roman garrison run out of Jerusalem. That prompted Cestius Gallus, the legate of Syria, which is basically equivalent to a governor, to bring in the 12th Legion Fulminata. Fulminata, incidentally, just means thunderbolt. After deciding the legion was under strength, despite having attachments of the 3rd Gallica, 4th Scythica, and 6th Verata with it, Gallus sent the 12th Legion out of Jerusalem, where it was ambushed and massacred. 6,000 Romans were killed, and of even greater importance to the Romans than the loss of life, the legion also lost the Aquila. The Aquila, if you're wondering, was the eagle standard that the Roman legions carried. It was considered a disgrace to lose the Aquila, and in fact most legions that lost it in battle were disbanded. This was in part due to the fact that if a legion could not recover their Aquila, it was almost certainly because they had lost so many troops that they were no longer combat effective. Otherwise they would have fought to get it back. That's how important the Aquila was to Romans. But in this case, the 12th Fulminata was not disbanded. Instead, Nero ordered General Vespasian to take the 10th Legion Fretensis to war. Vespasian would land in 67 AD in the town known as Acco Israel, but then was called Ptolemais. Already in Judea was the aforementioned 12th Fulminata with detachments of the 3rd Gallica, 4th Scythica, and 6th Verata. Vespasian brought not just the 10th Fretensis, but also the 5th Macedonica. Finally, Vespasian's son Titus arrived with the 15th Apollinaris. Now, there were a lot of numbers in that, so let me just summarize. If you count the number of legions partaking in the war against the Jews, it's the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th, 12th, and 15th legions. That's 7 legions, or parts of legions, making up this massive army going after the Jews. So back to the history. Vespasian landed at Ptolemais in April of 67. His son Titus arrived from Alexandria to join him, and together they began to subjugate the area. In fact, Titus, using the 15th Apollinaris, is the one who captured Josephus, and would later take him with his army when they conquered Jerusalem. So Josephus was an eyewitness to these events, although writing as a prisoner, he obviously was not free to be very critical of the Roman campaign. On June 9th, 68 AD, Emperor Nero committed suicide. This led to the Year of 4 Emperors, where 4 different generals vied to become Emperor of Rome. The final result was that in July of 69, Vespasian returned to Rome and became Emperor himself. He gave his son Titus charge over the war in Judea. Titus besieged Jerusalem in 70 AD as direct general over the 12th Fulminata and the 15th Apollinaris, along with the 10th Fretensis and the 5th Macedonica. At this point, the 10th Legion was commanded by Larcius Lepidus, and they camped on the Mount of Olives. They had the best artillery, so from that position they lobbed stones from their ballistae and caused heavy damage to the walls and killed lots of people. Meanwhile, Titus fought alongside the 12th and 15th Legions in the direct assaults. Ultimately, when the Romans broke through the temple, it was with the 12th Fulminata. Yes, the same 12th Fulminata that had lost their Aquila destroyed the temple. After killing the priests and looting the temple, the legions set up their imago, which was the image of the emperor that they carried with them. Typically, it would have been the image of the current emperor, so in this case it probably would have been Vespasian. Although if it was an older image, it might have been Nero. During the next spring, Titus would leave and return to Rome. Lucilius Bassius took over the 10th Legion to mop up the last of the resistance, but he died of an illness. That left Lucius Flavius Silva to replace him, and it was General Silva who built the giant siege ramp up to Masada to discover the dead bodies of the Jewish rebels who, according to Josephus, had killed themselves when they knew that the battle was hopeless. There's some debate on whether they killed themselves or if the Romans just slaughtered them when they conquered the fort. So by this point, you're probably wondering, what was that correlation I was talking about earlier? Well, knowing what you know now about the First Jewish War, let me read you something. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword must he be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. This, of course, is the famous passage from Revelation chapter 13. Hopefully you spotted some of the reasons for the correlations I saw that got me interested in this. We have 2 beasts in view here. The first beast, which is from the sea, and the second beast, which is from the earth. The first beast was said to have had 10 horns and 7 heads. Think about that. The 10th Roman legion literally has a name as being from the sea, and this beast has 10 horns and is said to be from the sea. That might be coincidental, but not only that, it has 7 horns. If you've read any of the Psalms, you'll know that a horn is often used there as a reference to military strength. And when it came to this war, there were 7 Roman legions involved. Even that could be considered a random coincidence, except that one of the horns had a mortal wound that was healed, and we know for a fact the 12th Legion was massacred to the point of losing their Aquila, and yet they were healed. That is, they came back, and not only did they come back, but they actually helped capture the temple in Jerusalem. And think about what the people were saying. Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? The Roman military might crushed Judea. The Jews had no chance. They held out for as long as they could, but other than that one ambush that worked, they never won a battle. They inflicted heavy damage, yes, but never gained a victory against the Roman army. So what are the haughty and blasphemous words that the beast proclaimed? Well, we've already seen that each Roman legion had a name that went with it, and they each carried emblems. I already mentioned the warship the 10th Legion had as its emblem, but their patron god was Neptune. The 15th Apollinaris worshipped Apollo. The 12th, with its thunderbolt, worshipped Jupiter. When going against a monotheistic religion that the Jews held to, these were each blasphemy. On top of it, the Romans destroyed the religion of the Jews and put in place their own standards and images, proclaiming the emperor to be God inside the Jewish temple. Also, see how this beast was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months? That's 3.5 years. Vespasian landed in April 67. Jerusalem fell August 30th of 70. Even using today's calendar, which the Jews did not use, that's 41 months. The Hebrew calendar consists of 354 days per year, as opposed to our 365 days, and that means their calendar moved ahead an extra 38 or 39 more days, putting it in another month. In other words, it took 42 months on the Hebrew calendar for Vespasian to start the war against the Jews and for Titus to conquer Jerusalem. This beast was also said to be allowed to make war against the saints and to conquer them. That clearly happened with the Roman armies, who took many captives and who killed a whole lot more. And what of the second beast? Revelation says it exercises all the authority of the first beast, which is exactly what happens when power shifts from one general to the next. It happened first when Vespasian left for Rome and put Titus in charge, and then again when Titus left, leaving Bassius in charge, before he died and left Silvia in charge. It says that it can make fire come down from heaven, which is literally what happened with the ballistae the 10th Legion used. And not only that, but Josephus says that the stones that were used were so bright that the defenders in Jerusalem would see them in the air and call out, "The sun is coming." Sun as in male offspring, not the star in the sky. And what's of note in that particular phrase is the footnote provided by the translator says the word sun is used both in Greek and Latin versions of Josephus's work. So it's actually what they were saying. There's no mistranslation here. What's really interesting about all of that is how Jesus, sitting on that very same Mount of Olives, the spot the 10th Legion was using to lob those rocks at Jerusalem, said in Matthew 24 that there will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And this is in the context of the destruction of the temple. Matthew 24 begins by saying that the temple will be torn down and not a single stone will be left atop another. And verse 3 tells us that when he got to the Mount of Olives, his disciples asked him, "When? Is this just a coincidence that these stones will be called the sun by the defenders on the wall?" In any case, when the Romans realized that their stones could be seen and avoided, they blackened them and as a result began to kill far more people. And when it came time to invade the city, they also set the stones on fire to help set the city alight. In other words, it literally was fire coming down from heaven. And to see more of how the passage fits, it also says that those who did not worship the image of the beast that was struck by the sword but lived were put to death. If the beast that was struck by the sword and yet lived is a reference to the 12th Legion that was destroyed and yet came back to conquer Jerusalem, the image they set up would have been that of either Nero or Vespasian, either of whom were considered divine by the Romans. In fact, if you look at the Ark of Titus that was built in Rome by his brother Domitian to celebrate the conquering of Judea, the inscription calls Titus Divo Tito, which means the divine Titus. So the emperors were worshipped as gods, and setting up the image of an emperor was equivalent to setting up the image of a false god. So what about the mark that was needed to buy or sell? Well, the word used in the passage typically refers to what is impressed into the coins, which had the same image of the Roman emperor on one side. But what of that mark specifically? The number 666. Well, it's not just a number. It's represented by 3 Greek letters. The first is a chi. And what does a chi look like? A Roman numeral 10. X. Is that just another coincidence? Well, next up was a xi. Now, most Bibles have the lowercase text, but original manuscripts are all in uppercase. The uppercase xi looks like 3 parallel lines. And remember how the 10th Legion had a trireme as its emblem? And the triremes have 3 rows of rowers? Again, perhaps it's just a coincidence, but there are a whole lot of coincidences piling up here. Finally, the last character I always thought was a sigma, but it's not. It's actually a letter that used to exist in the Greek alphabet, but which disappeared sometime after Homer. We know this because the text of Homer, the only copies of which that we have are centuries after his death, do not contain the letter, but it throws off the meter of his poetry not to have that missing character in there. So the conclusion is that the character was voiced before 400 BC or so, but after 400 BC, it was just used solely as a number. In any case, I don't know what the letter was called during the time that John wrote Revelation, but now it's called a stigma, after a sigma and tau. Now again, I'm not sure if it was called a stigma back in the 1st century, but if it was, it should be noted that a stigma means exactly what it means in English, a mark of shame or a cut, like in the stigmata. Also interesting is the name for 6, which we can see in words like hexagon or hexadecimal, is hex, which means a curse in English. So the Greek character and the name of the number both have negative connotations in English. Anyway, when we look at the character used to represent 6, and you can look this up and see it if you want online, the glyph that represented the letter looks like the Latin letter F, like Fretensis. So the actual symbols used to represent the number 666 would have looked like a Roman numeral 10, 3 parallel rows like a trireme, and a Latin F like Fretensis. Again, all of that could be coincidence. I'm not going to push that one too far, but it's sort of suspicious. It's not just the shape of the characters that are of interest, but the numeric value as well. Irenaeus, an early church father who was born around 130 AD, wrote that he believed the 666 stood for, wait for it, the word Titan, where the name Titus is derived. And if you add up the values of the Greek letters in Titan, it does indeed make 666. So was Titus the man at the end of Revelation 13 who was the beast? It would definitely make sense given that he literally destroyed God's temple. The 10th Legion began the invasion with Vespasian. Do you know what Vespasian's full name was? Try Titus Flavius Vespasianus. His son Titus was Titus Flavius Kaiser Vespasianus Augustus, and Titus's brother who succeeded him was named Titus Flavius Kaiser Domitius Augustus. That's 3 emperors in a row, each with the name Titus, each of whom matches the description of the beast. In fact, Domitian was so evil that after his death he received a damnatio memoriae, meaning his memory was condemned and his image and name were obliterated from official records. To that point, only 2 other emperors had received that distinction, Caligula and Nero. So what does this all mean? I think the beast from the sea was the 10th Legion. The beast with the number 666 is Titus, and it probably refers to all 3 of the emperors from that family. Each of them were evil by any standard. In fact, Vespasian started work on the Colosseum, Titus finished it, and Domitian, who likely murdered his brother to take the throne, would have his memory damned by Rome after he was assassinated. But what implication does that have for us today? Well, I think a lot. When I was in high school, I lived in a very rural area of Colorado. In fact, my graduating class only had 27 students. The first chemistry course I took in college was in an auditorium that held more people at 300 students than my entire school did K through 12. Many of the Christians in the area were what you'd probably call preppers now. A lot of them were die-hard into conspiracies. I got to hear a lot of them because my dad was pastor of one of the churches in the area, and many of these people would come up to church and talk about the end times. Everything was conspiracy this and conspiracy that. And it was frustrating to no end. There is no logic that will convince someone who believes in a conspiracy because facts and logic are all part of the conspiracy, you see? But here's the bottom line. I see so many Christians terrified, absolutely terrified of the Antichrist and the beast and all these things. They live in fear that at any second the tribulation could start. Any study of Revelation at church, they always ask, are you pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib? And I always say, I'm so post-trib, I think it happened almost 2,000 years ago. Yes, what I'm saying is virtually everything that Christ said would happen in passages like Matthew 24 actually happened in 70 AD. Virtually everything in the book of Revelation happened by the time Jerusalem fell. Not all of it, but nearly all of it. Is it possible that some of them could have dual fulfillment? Well, yes, that's certainly a possibility. After all, there were some Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled during the time of the prophecy, and then later were shown to be references to Christ. But the thing is, you can't just assume there will be a dual fulfillment, and then live in fear that maybe the things that happened in 70 AD will happen again. It would be like if I told you, I'm going to purchase a laptop this year, and then I buy one in June, and then 5 years from now you see the laptop I've got and the warranty showing I bought it in June of this year, and you conclude, any day now he will buy a new laptop. That's the level of what we're doing with the words of Christ. He said, there are some of you standing here today who will not taste death before you see all of these things. And he said, this generation will not pass away before all of these things take place. Revelation even says these are the things that must soon take place. And then they did. And then we're like, maybe they'll happen this year or in the next 40 years. Really? That's what you're going with? You're making Jesus into a liar by pretending what he said was not fulfilled in order to, what? Scare yourself about the future? I mean, we know that scaring ourselves is lucrative because Stephen King has a job. But imagine what a powerful apologetic you would have if you were to tell non-believers, our Messiah said exactly what would happen more than 30 years before it happened, and then it did happen. How can you not believe? No. I suppose it is much better to just be terrified of barcodes.